Hi, my name is Sam, and for today's speech, I'd like to start with a short story. There's one guy standing on the tall roof of a building, wearing the red costume. He raised his arms and jumped. Is that a bird? Is that a plane? Oh, that man crashed the car. This is the beginning scene of the movie Kick-Ass, and the topic I'm talking about is the comic books. Obviously, this poor guy is influenced by the heroic image of the comic book a lot. And I think reading comic books has a negative impact on children's growth. To support this topic, there's two reasons I need to point out. The first one is that the comic books introduce the violence, sex, and drug use to children. The second one is reading comic books reduce children's reading level. Okay, let's begin with the first point. When we're young, many people introduce the heroic image to us as our model. Someone like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, all these kinds of men. But but how they deal with evil? They fight, they punch each other with their all force and make everyone bleeding. They break their bones, and can that be taught to the children? Well, if you have a dream about a laughing Joker who is bleeding and laugh, is that a nightmare? Based on the Multiversity Comics, the website, they did a survey about parents and what they think about comics. 42% of parents think the comics, they really concerned about the content of the comic, such as violence and sexual image inside. Okay. There's one professor, journalist professor of Columbia called Hajdu David, and he wrote a book called the 10 Cents Penny Pledge. Pledge. And it talks about the 1950s, the influence of comic and the panic it caused. And he takes some data from the Hoover, a sociologist at that time. He writes, in the year the comic books about crime published, 17% of more young men under 21 were arrested for assault, 26% more for disorderly conduct, and for women, 39% in arrest for prostitution, and 69% for disorderly conduct. The result is not collected scientifically at that time, but still it shows the strength of the young people that they like to have an improper language, attitude, modes of dress, and personal grooming, taste in music, style of dance, and reading matters. And in his book, there's one quote can represent the situation. The quote says, "Comic books not only inspire evil, but suggest a form for evil to take." Wow, that's horrible. Okay, then let's go to the second point. Comic books reduce children's reading level. First, there's one doctor graduate from Kansas State University in philosophy doctor degree, and he pointed out that if you introduce the comics in the class, the humorous and picture will help children to understand the material in the textbook and help the struggle student to understand the literature better. However, although it seems really good at the beginning because it motivates students' curiosity, but for a long term, the students will get used to these pictures to explain the literature, and they will lose their sense of critical thinking and reading. And there's a lot of parents post their blogs on the website, talks about their concern about children. There's one that post the blog and talks about his doctor. When she entered fifth grade, she should read a list of books. However, what she did is just keep reading the same comic books she had read for a dozen times. And even when she had to come to the list of the books she needed to read, it takes a relatively longer time and a few more attempts for her to finish that. So, he concluded that lots of pictures, simple vocabulary, and action or jokes in every sentence is the only thing she is looking for from the book, instead of the context and the rhetorical in the book. So obviously, comic books does not help her to reading well. Okay, based on these two reasons, the violence and it's not good for kids reading, I think comic books has a really negative impact on children's growth. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's talk about structural things first, because that's, I think, where you're on the most solid ground. You've got a clear statement of the proposition. I like the opening attention device referring to the opening of Kick-Ass. I thought that there was a pretty good preview of the secondary points. There are only 2 of them, and so you let us know where you're going with that. In the body of the speech, you cite those 2 supporting points pretty effectively, so I think you're on solid ground there. Now, your explanations of the supporting points, that's where you start to run into some problems, and your proof on those particular points, I think, is really problematic. Most of the information that you have on the first point seems to refer back to a book that you yourself seem to discredit, that was written back in the 1950s and has some negative comments about the kids reading the comic books. And that's about as close as you get to any proof on that particular point. And the link to the comic books is almost non-existent. So I'm not exactly sure why you're citing a piece of data that you yourself seem to be somewhat critical of. That seems kind of odd. That parents are concerned about what their kids are reading, I think that's a good thing. But the demonstration that comic books are automatically problematic, or that they produce a violence or a desire for violence, or that the kids only see violence as the appropriate solution, I don't see any evidence of that. In fact, it seems like there may in fact be contrary information on this. It seems like comic books have probably gotten more and more violent in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the degree of violence and problems that we have with kids has gotten smaller and smaller. So, on its face, I think that there's a big reservation kind of built into our thinking on this issue. On the second point, that kids maybe don't develop literature or the ability to read as effectively because they become dependent on comic books, the only evidence that you have is something posted by a blogger who discusses the problem with his daughter. Now, I don't know what the problem with his daughter is. The fact that she reads comic books is mentioned, but the proof that she doesn't read anything else because she's dependent on comic books, that's a huge inferential leap to be making. And this is one person's opinion about this, and they're not an expert. They have no background. They know no special training. They're just talking about their own kid. Maybe we just got one dumbass kid here, and that's their problem. The idea that you're going to create a generalization based on this. You don't have any data on literacy rates among young people, on pass rates for reading comprehension at different grade levels. There's no correlation to whether or not people pass more or fail more in reading comprehension based on whether or not they read comic books. I think that this argument is really underdeveloped, and as a consequence, it's also undermined by the evidence that you cite. The one piece of testimony that you cite that comes from a credible source tells us that this kind of stuff is good for kids to learn to read with. You know, that's the Kansas State professor that you cite in this particular thing, who says, that it introduces, the introduction of this in class encourages students, it helps them understand, it encourages their reading. And that's the only credible information that you have here, and it seems to be taking the counter position to what you have. So I think you've got a well-structured argument. It's clearly identified, and that your proof for it is underwhelming, and that's problematic. All right, thank you.